Hello and welcome to another episode of The Real Deal with Josh and Charles. As ever, I'm Josh, joined by my co-host, my friend, my confidant, my bon vivant, Charles Hobby. Hello, Charles.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, it's Charles.
How would you describe the tone of this recording session for the podcast?
We're rushed.
Yes, we're rushed today, aren't we?
Yeah, we're gonna be talking faster than usual. Actually, funny story.
Hit me with it.
Last week I made the executive decision to cut out all the dead space between your words, and I shortened the episode by over 3 minutes.
So in a way, you're sort of settling into your role as not just a host, but an editor.
Yeah, and I decided that the way you stammer and pause between literally every word sometimes, I just decided that wasn't what that's not the direction I want this to go in, so I cut it out. So I'll do that again. Feel free, we can talk a little faster than usual, get through this, but I might just edit it out anyway, so we're all good.
Well, it's comforting to know that in your capable hands, the things that I labor over can be manipulated into something that's better than just who I am.
Exactly. I know you.
Uh-huh.
I understand you.
Yeah.
And I know our listener. And
do you?
He really hates it when you do that. So I just decided to go that way.
That was good. Okay. Today on the show, I have to say I think this is the first
I'm going to cut all that out. Don't worry about
it. Of the podcast. It's called dramatic pausing. Christ. This is just like
this is the worst episode? What was
No. This was the first episode, which does rhyme with worst, to your credit.
Okay.
This is the first episode where one of the films we saw really fucked me up, really got in my head and my heart and took a big old shit all over my sense of the world. And I have to give The Lobster a lot of credit for really making me profoundly sad.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was by the guy who did Dogtooth until afterwards, and it makes so much sense.
See, that's funny because I went in with that being the selling point, was that The Lobster made by a Greek man whose name I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce.
No, don't do it.
Can you try? One of us should
Go.
try.
Okay, I actually have it right here. That's not too bad. Yorgos Lanthimos.
That wasn't so bad.
I took Greek.
Did you?
Yeah, I hated it.
The classics, huh?
I'm sure modern Greek is great. Those people are great, but I hated ancient Greek.
Did you get a lot of butt because you told girls that you studied ancient Greek?
No, I didn't.
Huh. So it didn't pay off in any way? In any
Well, I didn't really talk
way.
to girls, no, until after years after I studied Greek. So, no, I don't know. Maybe it would have worked.
Maybe it was the story of a young Jason and the Argonauts that inspired you to erotic heights later in your life. So in a way, it did pay off.
It could have, yeah. And, it was definitely put me in a bad mood. And I think some chicks dig that, right? The bad boy.
Well, we're kind of a pair of conflicted, cloudy bad boys, and no one knows what we're thinking or feeling, and it's very attractive because it's so mysterious.
Oh, I got one.
Okay.
It's all Greek to them.
All right. Can you edit that out too, as long as we're editing out the pauses that I make?
Actually, I have no way to edit myself. Just you.
Oh, well. Okay. So conveniently enough, I'm the only person in this podcast who can be edited, and you're the only editor.
Hey, it's, if there were more people on the show, I could probably edit them too. But, I just haven't figured out Audacity yet. But I'm working on it.
It is amazing to me that I am a public radio producer, and I somehow am so negligent I let you edit the show. And you can't use the fucking freeware without a fucking nightmare. All right.
No, I'm getting into it. But it's
happy.
True, That's why we're in a rush. It's why the episodes sound so good, though. I do say so myself sometimes.
When do you say? Do you remark that to yourself in the car while you listen back to episodes?
No, I do it at work. I do everything at work. Pretty much everything that I don't want to do, I do at work. So at least I can tell myself, I'm getting paid to do this. While I also say, this is good if I do say so.
I'm actually at my workplace right now.
That's great. See, we know how to live the American dream.
Yeah, I think we really capture that. Two lonely men who miss each other desperately, reviewing movies and talking over the cell phone to each other about those movies and not always agreeing. So
not all. That's the key. Because if we agreed always, we could get rid of one of us Probably.
I like to think of that we're kind of like a regular Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, exchanging witticisms and wordplay and a sort of friendly rivalry that shapes this great nation and makes it live up to its potential.
Ah, I love it. I love it. Who
Mm.
am I? Am I Adams?
Well, you're, less pleasant than I am, so I'm going to say that yes, you're Adams, and I'm the cosmopolitan, globe-trotting drunk Thomas Jefferson. Minus the
Well,
slaveholding thing. I don't
I was gonna
think.
say you
Right.
sort of left out the slave fucking thing.
Right. Well, I don't
So
think. I think if I was Thomas Jefferson, I would have had the foresight to not have done any of those bad things, and I think we can all agree and close the book on that topic. And I'm pretty sure, we talked about a lot of this in the Quentin Tarantino episode. So I'm just gonna say, onward to Greece, where slavery was never a
Onward.
problem. Yes.
no, I'm gonna Foley in a book closing sound.
Yes, good. Yes, heighten
Perfect.
that. And may I say, the only slaves that exist today are the slaves of capitalism. That's actually not true. There's a lot of actual slaves out there. Yes, so them too. But also, more metaphorically, capitalism.
Yeah, like me and
Mm,
you and
yeah,
everyone we. Oh, that was amazing. I
that
didn't
was
even
pretty
mean to
good.
do that.
Oh yeah, the
So
other
today
movie
we
is Me,
watched.
You, and oh yeah, you say it.
Okay. We watched two movies today that both dealt with romance and relationships and getting along with each other, and they both did it in very different ways. And one of them was the 2005, I think, classic Me and You and Everyone We Know, and the more recent The Lobster by that Yorgos fellow.
Mm.
And yeah, where do you want to start? Where do you want to go
Well,
from?
where to start, really? These two movies basically both engage with differently accented and to vastly different pitches, but like the overarching structures that define how we relate to each other. And in Miranda July's Me, You, and Everyone We Know, a movie I somehow had never seen before this week.
Wow.
It seems like something I would have seen. I saw it with my betrothed, Amanda, who was like, "Oh, well, you love I Heart Huckabees. How did you not see this movie?" And I said, "Amanda, we'll talk about it in the car. I don't want to argue right now." And we, so we without incident, sat down and watched that film after we saw The Lobster. So to go in chronological order, let's start with The Lobster because that deals with a very literal, overarching societal structure. It's a movie that I think can be best compared to 1984 in a lot of ways. It's a dystopian movie where there's this massive monolith in the center of the film that the characters we follow bend, fold, and are crushed by. But unlike 1984, it's nothing as simple or as imaginatively shallow as a monolithic totalitarian state. Rather, it's everything about relationships and love and intimacy reduced to the barest, most brutal possible formula. And it's a film that follows people attempting to interact in this world where love exists purely between two people who are similar and people who overcome very demarkable societal boundaries to achieve being in a couple, which is the ultimate goal of this civilization that we encounter. And I was really gutted by this, Charles. This was an exhausting, an exquisitely well-made movie, but the thing about well-made movies that are super brutal is that they just leave you limping away, and I was really in a state after this.
Wow, I'm sorry. I wish we had done The Nice Guys because would have put you in such a nice little mood.
Like the title.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do it another time. But yeah, I mean, I really actually like that comparison to 1984. I didn't think of that. I wish I had now, but it's true. It really just strips down all the emotion and reality that we try to look at with romance and love and even just relationships, friendships too, and it just brings it down to like the mathematics and diagrams, and it just sort of turns everything we do that we think of as so poetic and magical, and it just sort of strips that all away and makes the whole point of this movie about these people desperately trying to find love not really for any reason other than to A, not be turned into an animal, and B, so that they can have a couple thing that they should enjoy. And it's I didn't really. I mean, Dogtooth is again, it's the same thing. It's really well made, but it's so hard to get into it in the same way that this one is. It's like so brutally just here's the elements that are in the story. And in this one, it worked a lot better for me, but it's true. It's pretty brutal and demoralizing. And
well, just
yeah,
to dial back for a minute, what Charles is alluding to is that the ultimate punishment for not finding a monogamous relationship through the central. The movie largely takes place at a hotel where singles go to gradually flirt in a very brutal, bizarre way and interact until they find a mate. And anyways, the threat of all of this is that if they're alone forever, they will no longer be people. They're transformed into an animal of their choosing. So that's what Charles is alluding to. And I just want to say right now, a little later in the podcast, that now that I know Charles is so liberally editing this, if he edits thinking of 1984 as a comparison to before when I said it, I want to say now, a second time, that I thought of that first, and Charles didn't think of it first, and he can't change history. So, that being said, you were comparing this to Dogtooth, the first outing by Yargos.
Yeah, that'll all stay in there intact, don't worry.
Oh, good.
It's even though I can record at home anytime and you have to record in the studio and this comes out in a couple of days and I have plenty of time to record my own monologue about 1984, I will not do that. So don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the Dogtooth I thought was it was very similar. I haven't seen it in a few years, but it was these same types of people and I should have recognized him. I was like, this seems really familiar, but I don't know this director. But he makes these people act in what we would think of as just sort of intuitive human ways, and he puts a precise purpose to our movements so that, we watch a family exist together and we see all the mechanisms that go into how this gets created rather than leaving that to the hidden psyche of all the characters. And in this, it's actually really funny. It's almost like a romantic comedy in the story architecture of like man looking for woman, man finds woman, doesn't work out, gets depressed, goes and lives by himself, and then finds someone magically without intention. Except here it's this awful slog through some of the most detached people wandering around, and it's Jesus. It was I really liked it, but I can see it really being taking its toll on you and being hard to get through.
Well, it's a movie where people are so desperate to conform to this system and are so desperate to not be alone and do anything they can to take the things that are distinct about them, erase them, and mold into what's expected of them by society. Again, it's like the most classic dystopian engine to a story. These people are trapped hopelessly in a system that seeks to just rid them of all individuality, or if they have an individual trait, it's treated very much in a transactional manner. So part of the finding a mate at the hotel is the idea that, let's say, if my flaw is that I have a bloody nose, you also have a bloody nose, and we both have bloody noses, and that means we're meant to be together. And that is part of the engine of determination about who ends up with whom in this system.
Yeah, and I really like the way that played out.
Oh, well, that was a very specific example from the film in which this very desperate man with a limp, actually, in one of the almost innumerable unwatchable scenes in this movie, sees a beautiful woman with a bloody nose and proceeds to ram his face into a table until his nose is bleeding, and then proceeds to live a life of fucking his goddamn face up every 5 minutes so that it's never in question that he shares a flaw with this woman he wants to be with. And he just does this very gamely. And again, in a movie where the entire audience flinching vibe was just like so, man, I've seen people walk out of movies before, and no one walked out of this movie. I want to be really clear, but I think they didn't leave the movie because they were like afraid to move. Honestly, it was just like the atmosphere of this movie, and not to revive a long conversation about trigger warnings that me and Charles have had, to sum up a very long conversation, Charles hates them, me way more ambiguous about them, and in a way I think they're appropriate at times. I honestly have told people since seeing The Lobster, if you're having a bad day or you're not in a great mood, you probably shouldn't see The Lobster.
And I would be that's not a trigger warning. I'm fine with that too, you know? That's we won't talk about it. That's a whole hour talk. But yeah, that's fine. It is. I would tell people that, if you're in a bad mood, probably should go see The Nice Guys because that you get to laugh at people in pain. Here, it just reminds you of how much in pain you might be. But I did like the whole cuz that's pretty much a lot of this movie was about the ways that we fall in love and what we're looking for. And I thought it was really a great idea to put that much focus on these small traits. And I think the guy with the limp, that little monologue that he gives talking about his mother and how she turns into a wolf and he has this limp because he got attacked by wolves. That was such a great scene. I loved that scene. It was just like a perfect speech given by these people. Like the way he writes are all really short sentences with small words, and like it just really fit the tone of the movie. But I love that idea that you get this sense of identity through what we would consider like a combination of traits. And this movie just totally literalized that idea and made a limp like the entire defining purpose here. So this man has a limp and he's looking for somebody else with a limp. And I thought that was done very well at first. It was sort of a fun play on what love might be. And then it just comes to such a powerful conclusion when we finally think that our main character falls in love with someone else and they share the trait of myopia. And then at the end, to spoil it for everybody,
Well,
like,
hold on. Let's not barrel through the most powerful metaphor in the film without some context.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Part of
Sorry,
the
I was just in a
activity,
rush. I gotta go in, like a half hour.
and I think we're doing a good job conveying that urgency to our listeners.
Yeah, I'm talking fast.
Let's slip into the fantasy world of podcast, because when our listeners put on their earbuds to listen to this, they're looking for a break in the mundane and the ordinary, and they want to hear two men talk about stuff for an hour. So let's give them that, if nothing else.
Okay.
At the hotel, you earn more time at the hotel before being transformed into an animal by going into the woods with a tranquilizer dart. Tranquilizer dart. I hate that word. I always say it horribly. And you hunt those who have chosen to live lives of total sexless, loveless, pure loneliness. A way of life exemplified by their form of celebration in which they all separately listen to CD players and dance in silence together.
They only listen to electronic music, I believe is what they say.
Which I love. That was a wonderful note.
It's a great little scene.
I think it's the kind of inflections to the film like that make it such a vicious movie, because the condemnation of our contemporary culture is so barely veiled. Like, the absurdities that exist in the film really stop feeling funny or out there very quickly. And the clipped, dry nature of the film makes even the threat of animal transformation just so boring and obvious in the world of the film that the whole thing becomes quite sinister. And, I'm sure it's not lost on this Greek director fellow that there is indeed a culture of people, the silent rave thing of people who actually do this. They, get together to listen to music on their separate music listening devices and dance in silence in public. And I wonder what kind of mind connects that to this larger societal impulse to eradicate all individuality, to live out these, machine pressed relationships that are clearly artificial, almost joyously artificial. But anyways, the group of loners in the woods who are being preyed upon by those seeking love, or whatever you want to describe what they're looking for, they are seeking to subvert, in turn, the machinations of the hotel. And, this takes different forms. They do a sort of late night raid on the hotel and point out the obvious artificiality of the relationships being promoted there. But one of the people who's a loner is Rachel Weisz, who I've not seen in a movie in a minute. And Colin Farrell, who is incredible in this film as the lead incredibly sad guy, falls in love with her, and they together try to find a way to seek out intimacy between these two poles of forced artificial togetherness and forced artificial separation. And that's the sort of second act of the film.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the context there. And I have some things, one thing I did notice that I was laughing quite a bit in the first 20 minutes, and as you said, it very quickly becomes hard to laugh at after a certain point. It just becomes very heavy. Even John C. Reilly, man, two episodes in a row where we watched the dumb fuck himself play two different types of dumb fucks. He had a lisp in this one.
I would say I still
good.
laughed at this movie more than we've got to talk about Kevin, but that is not saying a lot. And you were saying, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think we laughed at all. But no, it's true. I love the hotel raid scene, and I think that's sort of what I was talking about earlier was it's sort of the plot of a typical movie just made very literal. That scene was a great confrontation between the angry loners versus the system in place trying to get people to fall in love. And I think one of the most successful reason actually reminded me in some ways, I don't know if you saw that movie played entirely by deaf actors.
I did not.
We should probably do that for one of our episodes.
What, the Pack or something?
Yeah, that was what it called, I think. The Pack?
The Tribe?
It's a Tribe, yes, the Tribe. That's it. We should probably do that for another episode. I think it's really interesting. But in a similar way, not maybe quite as strongly as that movie, but this director and writer chooses to sort of end everything with a period. He never really gives us much of an accent, never really pushes things. And I think that scene where they make one of the best examples of it was when they make the husband and wife who run the hotel confront each other and have the husband essentially offer to kill his wife to keep himself alive. I thought that was just so well done, so well executed and played out. And we see this essentially ruining a relationship through this one act where he goes to kill his wife and the gun's empty. And then the scene ends and you just sort of are left with the two of them imagining them being together after that moment. And it was such a concise, powerful moment in the movie. And he does that throughout where we just sort of are led through scenes and then the scenes end. And the power in it is that we don't really get to see how it works out. And ultimately that's how the movie ends too.
Well, and what's interesting is that the gestures being made by the loners are in no way less bleak and upsetting than the gestures being made by those in the hotel, because they're almost jihadist style obsession with isolation is in many ways just as bleak and barren an existence as the forced monogamy of the hotel life. And when they realize that Rachel Weisz has this attraction to Colin Farrell, they blind her.
They do, which goes back to their earlier dysfunction of sharing myopia. So not only was it a cruel punishment, but it also essentially was the way in which they could end the relationship by removing their mutual attraction and their one similarity, their defining trait, which is, again, they're very well thought out.
Yeah, and in a way, this director in Dogtooth interrogates the family. What is the family? And actually, Charles, this might remind you of a film we watched together many years ago, that Mexican film about the cannibal father.
Oh, yeah, We Are What We Are.
We Are What We Are. That's another
movie.
film in this stripe where it sort of asks the question that I think Dogtooth mirrors. What does it mean to have a family? What does it mean to create knowledge in a silo? And sort of, this is who we are, this is what we do, and that's what this family is. And this movie broadens the scope of that societal critique in a way that, people use this phrase a lot, take no prisoners, but in this movie, the pretense of what constitutes a relationship is torn apart in a way that is just devastating. And at the same time, the encroaching individualism of capitalism, one that is, I don't think it's a mistake that the people in the woods are listening to electronic music on CD players by themselves. That's what capitalism does to families in another you know, in a sort of a flanking gesture of criticism, we don't gather around the TV anymore to watch the TV as a family. We all have our own smartphones. And before the TV, we all got together and did, so that sort of increasing microscopic obsession by a market on the individual is definitely part of the criticism as I perceive it in this film. So both life in the hotel with, these joyless relationships and life, in nature, but interacting with it only as the landscape to your own loneliness. These are two horrific things. And both of those groups do anything they can to erase any existence between two people that does not fall into their slotted policies. And there's no respite. It is an exhausting movie in that regard.
Yeah, which in the end, which is why I'm not quite sure it was a good movie and it was interesting, but ultimately I think me and you and everyone we know is so much better for me because I personally don't believe that that's all love is. I don't think that's what romance is, and I don't think this movie was an attempt to sort of show us what love could be by showing us the opposite. I really just think this director has fun tormenting sort of nice things, things that could exist or used to exist or what have you. He is not there to show us, like some movies you like have to go through something really terrible so that the director or writer can show you something the opposite. I think David Mamet's a really interesting director that oftentimes puts us through like con games and heists and people lying to each other and cheating each other when ultimately his goal is to show us that the opposite is something important. I don't think Yorgos is about that. I don't think he finds love to be important. I think he really just likes sort of sticking his nose, what's that, the little dancing finger nose trick? You like blow it, you make a raspberry and shake your nose fingers. You know what I'm talking about?
What the fuck are you talking about?
You put your thumb on your nose and you shake your fingers and you go,
Oh,
yeah. What's that called?
That legendary dismissive gesture.
Yeah, I think he just likes doing that to relationships and love, and I think those are probably, for me, the most important things in this stupid universe. And ultimately, while The Lobster is certainly fun and interesting and depressing and well done, I'm not sure it really accomplishes much other than to sort of mock what I think life's all about. So, at the
end, I think you're being a bit like our characters, the protagonists of the film, and you're being a bit myopic here, Charles. I don't think
you think so?
An attack on romance. I think it's a dystopia. It's a movie that takes social attitudes about what romance is supposed to be that are societally enforced, the threat of death. It's a movie just like, in a lot of ways, like The Witch, where what happens when a society wholeheartedly embraces a diseased, brutal view of how life is supposed to be, and when do we start to inhabit that internally? Like when do these societal underpinnings actually leach into how we can actually think and feel and process? Because in this movie, their solution to the problem of being rejected in a way by both the city and the forest is to escape the forest, pretend to be a couple in the city, and in the final moments, that's in many ways, I think, the Rosetta Stone to the rest of the film. The now blind Rachel Weisz sits at a table in a restaurant waiting for the love of her life, Colin Farrell, as he decides to make the ultimate gesture of similarity, and he goes into the bathroom with a steak knife, and he prepares to stab himself in the eye. And, by the way, if the audience was not fucking beaten into submission by this movie enough, this scene where we're, he very well we might be about to watch him blind himself. That is very realistic at this point in the film.
Especially after seeing Dogtooth, where you do see the act. In this movie we don't, but I was waiting for it. I thought it was going to happen where, just like in Dogtooth, you see someone smash their face to get their tooth out. So, yeah,
but here's the thing. It cuts back to Rachel Weisz waiting for him at the table. And then that's it. That's the end of the film. We don't know if he blinds himself. The ending question is does he have the gall to make that final societal gesture and blind himself to be the same as his love? Like, is that, does he fold and fall into that, or does he leave her there? Do they find some third option? I mean, you're right. There is no. This is so far from having a neat bow on it as a film. It's a distressing movie, and it's meant to be distressing, and it's a warning. I think there's a value in that. Me, you, and everyone we know, which we're about to get into more, is a very clever, artful, and insightful observation about who we are in the age of the internet in a way that was really very impressed by. But this is not about that. This is a much larger warning. I think this is about, what happens when the patterns of acceptance in our culture settle into unavoidable, just these tracks that we can't get off until the things that are organic and real and meaningful, the things that make, say, a Charles Hobby, that make his heart swell, much as the summer dew in the morning sky on the roses in the gardens. It's a warning about that. It's a warning that we can quietly settle into these things because no one in the film questions them. It's a total binary. And
and the reason why I preambled my earlier statement was that this could have been a warning, yet it did not ever offer that one thing that would have made it a warning or a tribute, rather than just sort of, to me, it just said, this is what love is. This is all love is. It's either going to be people forcing themselves to be with people they don't want to be with, or ruining themselves to do that. I was never received the tiny, hint that this was all in the purpose of something else other than to show us what really lies under every single relationship in the world. So
I don't know if I agree that it's a critique of relationships. I think it's a warning about what can happen if we don't take connections and emotion. Like, I think it's a warning more than it is like a nihilistic disembowelment of love itself.
Well, maybe I'll watch it again and try to find that. To me, I never got that. And, I'm trying to think of some examples of movies that do that. Actually, the Coen brothers, I think, are another really good example of that, where, a lot of their movies, you're just put through really bad situations, but I think they're all in the purpose of, exploring the idea. Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men is a really good example of that, where you follow evil around for an hour and a half, and at the end you're sort of, left with where did the goodness go? And I just didn't get that. I really think that Yorgos is really has fun sort of just shitting on things. And I think it's a really important warning. What he's talking about is where relationships are meaningless because of the systems we've created to make them work better, like marriage and, just doing this so that you'll have a companion even if you don't really love them. But I never felt that opposition. I never felt the draw to the other thing. I always just felt, look, isn't this terrible? Everything's terrible.
Well, there's no arguing with that. That is the tone. But I think there's a bravery to that as an artist and a filmmaker to fully inhabit that nightmare and render it in a way that is undeniable. And he did that. And that's an accomplishment. And I think that makes it a pretty exceptional film.
I don't disagree. I think it's a very good movie. Just for me, it doesn't quite, it just was sad. And it just, it didn't give me an alternative, and it didn't really, it just was like, here, this is what most of romance is, and you're all terrible.
Well, I'll say this. Leaving the theater, I saw it at the Angelica on Houston, and leaving the theater in Manhattan to get plunged into one of the most upscale shopping areas in the world was just the worst after dinner mint to that fucking meal. It was just like, everyone I looked at made me revulsed, because I was like, yeah, I think this guy is the kind of artist for whom the threat of artificiality seeping into every aspect of our lives distresses, upsets, and disturbs him more than anything else does.
Yeah, I would hope so.
And I think over these two movies, I think he is in a prophetic way telling us that we need to keep our eyes open and telling us that we have to be the own guardians of any sort of opposition we can raise to the flattening sameness of our mass culture. That's our duty. And he does that in words and actions just as blunt as a Jeremiah. And I really admire that.
Well, good. I'm glad you got that out of it. That's what I want out of it. I'll watch it again. I'll go in and see if I can feel that way afterwards, because it needs that, I think. And if you found it, I won't doubt it.
Well, I mean, I don't ever want to see it again. I'm happy I came to this conclusion, but that was like a
yeah. Now I have to go watch it again.
Oh my God, I can't think of any circumstance I would be like, hey, you got a couple hours to kill, friend? How about we watch The Lobster? I would never do that to someone.
Never. I would maybe tell them to watch it someday.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'd want to be there for it. But a movie that I would want to be there for again and again is Me and You and Everyone We Know, which we should now talk about because I have to go.
Segue of the gods. That was incredible.
Yeah. Let me just say, I saw this movie the day it came out, and it was actually probably my first date. If I would probably consider it to be my first date movie.
Did you bring up the Greek thing?
No, I didn't at that point. See, that was later. It was years later.
Well, just quickly before we get too far past this, what else do you remember about this date?
It was good, man. I don't know what happened. Everything fails. My whole life's pretty much a big failure. It went really well, and we saw a couple other movies, and then she was just like, yeah, that's okay. But that's fine. It was a good first date. We saw it at the Coolidge, which was where I ended up working for years, a little bit after that, and it was a nice...
In Boston?
In Boston, your favorite city and mine. And
I love it.
It was just it was a great experience. Absolutely love the movie. I've seen it probably 10 times at this point, and I will watch it again and again.
Well, I have to say I'm tremendously happy you picked that out, because it was a total antidote to The Lobster, and I watched it the day after, and in a way it covers some of the same territory. It's about isolated people living in a world of social dismemberment, but very specifically it examines how we relate to each other on the internet and how we relate to each other through media versus how we treat each other in real life, and what do gestures mean, and what does real communication look like, and what is at the heart of a family, what is at the heart of a love, what is at the heart of art. And it has that. I get now a lot of the Miranda July backlash. Like, she has a sort of pie-eyed naivete tone that she uses as her canvas. I kind of thought of it as like a sort of like twee John Waters almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I could totally see that.
It's a broad film.
Yeah, I love Miranda July. I think she's great. That was when I hadn't heard of her before this movie, and I've read her books now, her short stories, seen her movies. I think she's wonderful. I don't understand the backlash at all, Josh.
Well, I'm just saying, people make fun of other people, Charles. We're all adults, and I think I'd seen spoofs of Miranda July that I didn't understand until I saw this, and I get the angle, but I'm not joining in the chorus of haters. Like, I'm not pouring a big old glass of haterade. I'm not like that. You know that about me.
Well, if you were, we could actually end the episode now, and I could leave, but that's good. We can still be friends and enjoy the magical sort of down to earth. She's just so great. The way that she can create worlds that are so believable in some ways and then so fantastic in others. Like, she knows in some strange way how to have multiple, very complicated, different relationships all happening at once, and they're all like, they're just there as they would be. And then she introduces these elements of just like slight magical whatever. I can't even speak about it. It's so good. Like the things that come out to me are like the stickers in her car, and just the way that the way that the signs are put out on the windows, and all these little things that turn normal relationships in life into this other boundary where it becomes a story and it becomes so, not just fun to watch, and I love fun, but also just like it's that the example of making things a little more heightened and unreal just to like really get us back into reality, which I think she does a great job.
Yeah, she has a very good job stringing together threads throughout the movie very deftly, which I was very impressed by, in a way that's a bit more subtle than, say, a Wes Anderson, who I suppose is a contemporary worthy of comparison to Miranda July. Um, I think she, unlike The Lobster, which excels at alienating and distancing the audience from its characters, Me and You and Everyone We Know is largely about people who all want the same kind of love and acceptance and embrace. And that does serve as a very powerful palette to draw from when illustrating these people and how they treat each other.
Yeah, and it's so cool the way she talks about romance and love, but she has so many different examples of it. We have the typical husband and wife who are now separated. You have the woman looking for something important, but you also have the friendship between the two girls. You have the strange sexual tension between the older guy and those two girls. You have the young boy who has we got to talk about him a little later, but the youngest boy is amazing and way he's just sort of exploring life, and then the slightly older boy who doesn't seem to have very many friends and is trying to understand where he fits with women and himself. And it's just like she puts together this cast of characters that all make sense, they all seem real, and they're all really trying to get through this life and figure out what they want to do. And Robbie, that was the little boy's name, right? Robbie?
I believe so.
I can't imagine this movie without Robbie. Even though it's so successful in so many ways, Robbie's just like, I think he's the heart of this movie, even though most of the stories about Miranda July and that funny guy getting together, I think Robbie's really he moves this story in so many cool ways, and it ends with him and that sort of magical moment of discovery about time and life and death and just growing up, and it's so good.
Well, the multi-generational thing is done so successfully and effortlessly that it does give the movie a depth and a range that, again, I brought up by Hard Huckabee. It's the top of this, a movie that examines similar questions of existence and meaning and the capability of love in a world that seems designed to separate us. But this is a much better movie than that, and I love I Heart Huckabees.
Yeah.
This movie, through these different lenses of, like the neighborhood creep, sort of like the self-conscious neighborhood creep communicating with the teenage girls who then try to measure themselves through sex and realize that that's a completely meaningless yardstick to like be separated by, and the moody teenage son who shows the tool of the anonymous chat to the child who decides that the ultimate form of intimacy is just to get right to it, the iconic infinite pooping back and forth forever thing. And the fact that he uses the copy and paste function in the anonymous chat is such a brilliant fucking mirror to the statement he's making about infinite togetherness. And, that's kind of the back and forth, the copy paste. That's really what Miranda July does with art and does in this movie, which is to show that we are all pulling from the same fabric, the same needs and desires and fears and pain and love, and that's what we give to each other. Like, no one is distant from that base material. We all come out of that, and it's just a beautiful movie, and I really loved watching it.
Yeah, and I forgot about the old couple too, and they were great. That man's awesome, and just it's so, we see love in all of its stages. We see it as it's dying between the two, the man and the woman who have those kids, and we see it just as it's beginning with Miranda July and the guy, and then we see it so old, like this having a 70 whatever year old couple that just met a few months ago, like. And then, and she dies. And it's just watching, Miranda July is so aware of time, and she puts it in the movie so well. I mean, the idea of forever versus ending immediately. She contrasts those two ideas so well that we want to have both, and we have both, and we don't. And the way, like that scene where they're walking down the street and they essentially experience their whole relationship in 2 blocks. Like, what a great idea! What a wonderful way to have 2 characters discuss the idea of love and the way that it lasts. And yeah, it's just it's great to see such playfulness done in also such a serious way. I always get, I get teary with this movie because it is lighthearted, but it's also just it reminds me of how serious we should take this stuff. And it's, even though it's all in the name of, having fun, which is why, it's funny. I didn't even think about this when I chose it, but The Lobster and this movie are really talking about the same thing. And this one just does, for me, it's a much more human expression. Like the other one is so, anesthetized and, bleached of any life. And that's the whole point. That's what the director was trying to do. And here we get the exact opposite. And for me, it's, that's what I want. That's what I like better.
Yeah, and before we go too far away from this, I want to say that the funny guy you mentioned, the sort of, I guess arguably you could call him the male lead, is the incredibly talented John Hawkes, who is a really wonderful actor, who was in Deadwood. He was in Winter's Bone.
Is he in Marcy May Marlene?
Yep, he plays
he was awesome
enigmatic cult leader in that film.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal actor, and I feel like this movie filled in a fairly large gap in my cultural familiarity with contemporary film, and I loved watching it. Something happened to me today that I thought reminded me of this movie. I dropped some avocado on my pant leg, and it looked like I'd come all over my leg. And I was like walking around, I didn't realize it for a little bit, and then I realized that it looked like I had dried semen on my pants. And
how would anyone really know that's different than usual, Josh?
Well, I know, right? I know I have a reputation to uphold, Charles, but I don't know. I really enjoyed this movie, and I'm not sure what else to say about it, but I wanted to end our conversation about it by talking about the moment in which the older man who loses his equally geriatric, late in life partner, he enters the art project of Miranda July's character.
Yeah.
And they copy and paste their relationship into this unending art piece that is then carried on through technology to other people. And yeah, I'm going to stop short of calling this movie optimistically into futurism. Like, I don't think it's, clearly that it explores the complications and difficulties of digitized or mediatized interaction just as much as it celebrates aspects of it. But it does give, I think, a real tonic to people like me who get really stressed about this shit by showing that through the internet and through video and through stickers on cars, we actually can communicate with people if we are open to really engaging with those things. And that's the kind of optimism that keeps me buoyant in an era where I worry that we're losing that kind of connection.
Yeah, no, I think this is one of those rare movies that actually really is excited about the way technology can interact with people, because, we watched High Rise last week, and Ballard's pretty much always obsessed with technology, pretty much destroying the way we deal with each other. And, you could, as you said, you could certainly make an argument that The Lobster is sort of talking about the same thing. But I think, Miranda, it can go both ways. And the fact that we have a 5-year-old kid meet a 40, 50-year-old woman, and they have that brief connection is just because of instant messenger. And it's just like the way it makes you think. And I love that you brought it up where the old man becomes involved in her art projects, and throughout the movie she insists that she's a solo artist. And it was no accident that at the end of the movie, just when she finally gets together with the guy, that she now is also collaborating in her own digital art pieces with somebody else. And I love that. Actually, that story with the older people is one of the most touching parts of the movie. And you see sort of at the end of life, and it sort of just makes you really think about the time that passes. And so much of this movie is about forever. I mean, there's the pooping back and forth forever, but there was also, I can't remember them now, but if you watch the movie, I'm sure you'll notice it where the word forever is used a lot, and it's always about, oh yeah, there's sleeping forever, where they talk about, they had sex, but what was really magical was falling asleep, and they just wanted to sleep like babies forever. And this idea that we want these relationships to last forever, and they aren't going to. Whether they last until you die or whether they end earlier than that, they're just never going to last forever. And it's always that pull that's really making things so desperate. And yeah, Miranda July, she gets it. I'd love to meet her. She's like one of the coolest artists out there, and I think she's got a really great voice.
Yeah, and Miranda, top marks from the boys over at The Real Deal. And yeah, I think that I like the movie. It involves sex, but it involves sex as an act of comfort and love in a way that keeps it in line. Like when the middle-aged woman looking for this debauched sexual experience with an anonymous stranger instead meets an inquisitive 5-year-old and they share a kiss, it's not weird. They're expressing, she sees in his eyes the same love and comfort and quest for infinite, like, care and warmth that they both share. And, in a way, I think there's another conversation about what it means to maybe dull the edges of what sex can be in our culture in this film. But it's also very beautiful, and I understand the aspect of that paradigm she's drawing on.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of talk when it came out about whether these actors should have even been put through this, to have such a young kid, even if it's just acting, talk about this stuff and essentially engage in sexual activity with older people. I sort of see what they're saying, but on the other side of that, kids are all about that. Kids from even, the youngest ages are always trying to figure this out. And, I think it was even hard to say whether this kid was just a really good actor or just a kid and saying lines like the earnestness with which he talks about pooping in someone's butthole back and forth is just so great. And it's not that we shouldn't allow kids to talk about that. Is what they talk about anyway. And it was just wonderful to see it put in a movie and sort of use that as a springboard to talk about the way kids grow up, and to have the old couple sort of near the end and then push to that scene at the very end where we watch the kid learn that the noise that he's been hearing ever since he moved into that apartment isn't the lights like his mother says, it's a man tapping a coin, and like the way that it moves time and slows down time, and it's just like you see him take over the coin. I thought that was such a great way to end that movie.
And I think the closing image that I like with this film is that people enter situations with set expectations about how things are supposed to happen, and they are pushed past those expectations and find a greater truth. And, that's to convincingly depict that and to make us all think about looking past our expectations of the world and finding those deeper truths is immensely valuable. And this is a very good movie.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen The Future, see The Future too. It's her other one. And read her books and, follow her on Instagram or whatever. Just,
be sure to follow The Real Deal Josh and Charles on Facebook and Instagram and on our website with joshandcharles.com.
Yeah, all those things. And I actually probably have to go. So it was a pleasure to speedily discuss these movies. And we'll be back to talk about more movies in hopefully a less rushed manner, more leisurely. Because I know that's what you want. You're probably listening to this on the road. And I probably just made you want to run a red light because of the my fast talking. So just we'll be back and we'll be a little more chill next time.
Yeah, and we'll endeavor to look a little deeper and find the cosmic love and comfort that we can provide each other next week on The Real Deal with Josh and Charles.